Hey, brother Nick. So I saw your video on the finale for Stranger Things, and I absolutely agree with you on most points. However, I believe that the final season was a great wrap up to an amazing show. Like, sure, it has its flaws, but I think it was a good enough wrap up for the show that it answers so many things. So I hope I can convince you and all of you watching as I try to clear things up with my take on the finale. First up, where are all the Demogorgons? Where are all the bats? I agree this was a little disappointing to not have them in the final episode at all, but I see a lot of people saying that this is a plot hole when it just isn't. Like, we know where all these creatures are. They are the Mind Flayer, right? They're all like conglomerated, acting as the flesh for the Mind Flayer. As we know, the Mind Flayer is made out of matter and particles and has no physical form. Like, we see this in the flashback with young Henry, in the mine shaft. We see this when Will breaks free from the hive mind in season 2 and spews all the mind flayer dust. We see this even in Shock Jock when they kill the demo on the roof with the electricity. We also see that the mind flayer can take hold of different people and use their flesh as his physical form, as we see in season 3 when all these people are marching in and dissolving into the mind flayer's flesh. I agree it's disappointing we didn't see hundreds of thousands of baddies, in Dimension X, but we know where they are. They are the big boss at the end because the mind flayer is just particles. So the flesh that they're fighting, that is all of the demigorgons and all of the demibats. Also, I would like to add that people on TikTok use the term plot hole a little too loosely. It's not a plot hole that we don't find out what happened to all those pregnant women in the lab. It's not a plot hole that we don't know what happens to Vicky and Robin after the finale. It may be bad writing, but it's not a plot hole that we don't find out what happened with Dr. K in the military. And speaking of Dr. K, I don't think her character was necessary. I do think they should have brought back someone from the previous season instead of introducing another random character this late in the show. Or at least introduce her earlier on as Dr. Brenner's like main boss or something like that. This is the wrap up season, and to introduce a new character so close to the end, it's a little lackluster. But I do believe we needed some character as the progression of the military's plot with all the experiments. They're starting the experiments again. And remember, the experiments are the whole reason Elle has to make a choice of sacrifice or not. I do agree they should have wrapped up the military story instead of an 18-month jump cut at the end. It's just a little strange not to see what the military does to Mike and the gang, especially since they all start fighting and breaking free from the military. I'd like to imagine that as soon as the gate closes in the library, the military just all they pack up and head home, and the gang is just sitting there like, "That's it. We're not going to jail. Nice." However, I don't think there would have been a harsh punishment as the military was doing some illicit experiments on people, and I was okay with not seeing how it wrapped up, but some explanation would have been nice. I agree with you and many others. I feel like Holly got a little too much screen time, but I don't think it negatively impacted the story or plot at all. They were clearly using Holly and the kids as a device to tell the story of Vecna, his origin story, his motivation to kidnap kids, his plan. Like, this sets up the stakes for the end of the season. Also, you can't wrap up Max's story without including Holly. They're both in the same boat. So if you focus on Max, you're gonna have to focus on Holly, unfortunately. Also, Vecna's plan was to get weak-minded children to get like Dimension X into Hawkins. I guess Holly and her friends were some sort of main characters to focus on instead of bringing in 12 random new characters. I can see where people are upset because this is the finale and all of a sudden we're focusing on a main character that was never really a focal point in the whole show. I wonder if they did this to do a spin-off with Holly, especially at the end for when we see Mike pass the torch, or should I say pass the dice, to Holly at the end, suggesting a spin-off story with that new group of kids. And Kali should have stayed in season 2, if I'm being honest. It felt like a bit of a cop-out to use Kali as a way to set up Elle's like potential sacrifice to then just kill her off. It also feels like they only brought back the hologram mind manipulation powers that she has to set up the ending as an, I don't know, what do you think happened? Do you believe? And Kali was so set on Elle sacrificing herself to end the cycle. So it was a little silly since all it took for her to change her mind was a 5-second speech from Hopper. Like, if she was so set on ending the cycle, a simple speech would not do that. I feel like they only brought her back as a fake out for when we thought Vecna was in the lab and like to set up for interpretation ending whether she dies or not. Colleen did say something rather interesting while we were thinking of it. She says, and I quote, Kali was the devil to Hopper's angel on the shoulders of Elle. She was there to counteract Hopper's hope for a happy ending. She kind of ate with that one. Talking about the dark Christmas not being so dark, I believe that this dark Christmas was two things. One, it was dark because we find out what the Upside Down really is. We find out Vecna's motivation for kidnapping kids. We see Jonathan and Nancy have a not posal. We see Dustin and Steve get into a big fight and discuss some pretty deep stuff about losing a loved one. And two, this dark Christmas was a massive fake out to build up hype for the season. It's just marketing. They were suggesting so many people die, so of course they're going to market it as this is the darkest Christmas. You don't want to miss it. I do think that the 3 episodes released on Christmas were some of the darker ones we have seen in this season. I mean, you have the hardest scene ever in a show in Shock Jock when Will takes over Vecna. He's taking over Vecna, like the big bad. Like, that's so cool, and he breaks his leg and sends a message to Max. That's the coolest scene ever. I do also believe that people might have a different definition of dark, because you might say that the not posal by Jonathan and Nancy wasn't dark, but the falling out of a relationship and the stress that those two might die in that moment, it's pretty dark in my opinion. Mainly, I think the dark Christmas was to fake out the audience and get people watching on one of the biggest holidays. And finally, this video is being recorded on the 7th at 12 a.m., so I guess the 8th, and I can finally close this conformity gate that everyone's talking about. Unfortunately, there is no secret 9th episode coming, at least not on the 7th, but we'll talk about that soon. I just want to address all the theories and talking points that everyone posted on TikTok about conformity gate, because some of these are insane. First, the pose that you hear everyone say is the same as Henry or Vecna is crazy, since in reality, they're just crossing their hands. A lot of people do that. And in the pictures that people are posting, it's not everyone doing it. You see people in the background don't have their hands crossed. So it's like, that theory doesn't really hold up, in my opinion. Also, graduation gowns being orange when their school colors were green and yellow or whatever, that doesn't really hold up, in my opinion. I don't understand how orange means that they're still under control. Like, what's the significance of orange, right? Does Dimension X look orange, therefore they're still under the Mind Flayer's control, Vecna's control? And the D&D book spines are one of the biggest stretches in all the history of theories. I mean, people draw an outline and chose certain letters. They didn't line up perfectly. They're not like the last letter of each name. They don't have the same color. They're not in different fonts. They were just chosen to loosely fit this narrative that there's going to be a secret 9th episode. Here, watch this. Did you know that the book spines line up perfectly in this one scene? And if you pick these letters and read them backwards, it says Elle is, meaning Elle is really dead. She's not actually alive. See how easy it was to make something out of nothing and make it seem believable to fit the narrative I want? Other theories I've heard is that in this scene, everyone is looking at the camera, which means we are under Vecna's spell and are still being controlled by him. This is crazy because they are clearly looking at Joyce and Hopper, who are actively getting engaged. Why would you not look at them? They're in front of the camera. They're looking at them, not us. And this scene, where everyone in the crowd is looking at the camera, hello? Do you see what else people might be looking at in this scene? Like, what? I have heard some convincing theories, though. One of them being what Brother Nick brought up, how typing fake ending or conformity gate in Netflix's search bar brings up Stranger Things. Why would Netflix not try and search for other related shows? When I typed in random words Stranger Things rarely popped up and only showed movies or shows with those words in the title. But when you type anything to do with fake endings, you get brought right to Stranger Things. Pretty damning, as Nick said. I've also heard this really cool theory, which I hope happens because this would be the best way to end a TV series, and the Duffer Brothers would be the smartest producers in all of existence. So we know Stranger Things is set in the 80s and has a lot of homages to things popular in the 80s. The most obvious homage is D&D, which was popular in the 80s. We see the kids dressed up as Ghostbusters for Halloween. We see Rubik's Cubes, which reached mainstream popularity in the 80s. And more importantly, for this theory, we see a movie from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise being played on the TV when Holly runs past, where we see Freddy Krueger. In many ways, he's actually really similar to Vecna. They both can get into people's minds and have telepathic powers, and they prey on the weak. Also, did you know Henry's father, Victor Creel, was actually portrayed by Robert Englund, who is the original actor to play Freddy Krueger? But what if there's a bigger connection to the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise? The original Nightmare series had 6 movies, ending with Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, where they kill Freddy and he is dead. However, there was a 7th movie in this franchise called Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was a documentary film. It followed the directors and the actors, even Robert Englund, who played Victor Creel. There were interviews and behind the scenes, and it feels like it's really a documentary. As the documentary goes on, you find out that Freddy Krueger is actually a demonic entity that is trapped inside the original 6 Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Sounds a lot like Vecna being trapped in the Upside Down by Elle in the earlier seasons. And now that the franchise has come to a close, Freddy has been released and hunts down the entire film crew. Well, have you heard about the documentary that Netflix announced called One Last Adventure, The Making of Stranger Things 5, coming out on January 12th? What if this is another meta homage to the Nightmare franchise, and the secret episode is actually that documentary? We all thought the 7 popping up everywhere was suggesting January 7th, which it hasn't come out. But what if it was actually referring to the 7th Nightmare on Elm Street movie? Interesting theory. Can't wait for the 12th to figure out. I'm going to watch the documentary anyways. Well, anyways, I had a great time watching the show, and it's definitely on my watch again list. I think that the last season isn't as bad as people are making it out to be. I won't say it was the best ending, or even close to the best ending, but I do believe it was a nice way to wrap things up. I enjoyed seeing them get a happy ending. I liked the reveal of what the Upside Down was. I thought it was great because they referred to wormholes since season 1. You know, that's been a talking point this whole time. And I loved how Will got his powers and actually was able to hurt Vecna, because when he got his powers, that scene with the 3 Demogorgons, that was the craziest thing ever. I was going crazy when I saw that. That was amazing. And I sometimes like when a show makes you guess at like the fate of a character at the end of the show. I know it's controversial, but I like not knowing if Elle is alive or not, leaving it open for theories. But if you ask me, I believe Elle lives. I believe.